close to on the phone as possible. That would be great.
Okay, I'll do.
We're getting started here, so we are live. Hello, my name is Chris, and I am the moderator for tonight's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Proposition 105, which is on your ballot this November. If at any point tonight you would like to ask us a question, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. Again, if you press 0 on your phone, you can ask us a question tonight about Proposition 105, which is on your November ballot. We're going to be joined by a few speakers tonight who are going to talk to us through what Proposition 105 means. One of our first speakers will be a man named Don Shawcroft. Don is the president of the Colorado Farm Bureau, and he's going to talk about how this would affect farmers. We also have Mary Lee Chin. She's a registered dietitian, and she'll be talking about how this law could affect food and food labeling. And then we have Dana Bieber, and Dana is an advocate for a variety of groups across the country that are concerned with this issue: farmers, agricultural groups, physicians, scientists. Again, for those of you who are just joining us right now, my name is Chris, and I am the moderator on tonight's telephone town hall. We'll be discussing no on Measure 105, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a question you want to ask at any point, go ahead and press 0 on your phone. It's just like raising your hand in a classroom. We would love to take your questions. We would love to hear from you. So please do press 0. Our first speaker tonight is Don Shawcroft. Don is a fourth-generation farmer from the San Luis Valley. Don's been active with the Colorado Farm Bureau since 1986, and he is currently the president of the Colorado Farm Bureau. Don's going to talk to us a little about how this would affect farmers. So, Don, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chris. I am from the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado, and I am very concerned about this initiative because it would create costly new bureaucratic requirements that would impact farmers, regardless of whether they grow genetically engineered crops or not. Farmers, food producers, and processors would have to install separate and costly new production systems for growing, harvesting, packaging, processing, and transporting products. All food would have to be tracked, regardless of whether they are produced or handled with genetically engineered ingredients. Conventional, also referred to as non-genetically engineered, ingredients and food products would require documentation in order to avoid being labeled as genetically engineered. This measure would require food that is produced in Colorado and exported to other states to have special labels that aren't required in any other state. This would put our farmers and food producers at an unfair competitive disadvantage and cause them to lose hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. In the end, Proposition 105 would hurt thousands of family farmers and small businesses and increase grocery costs for all Colorado families by hundreds of dollars per year. That's why family farmers and agricultural groups from across the state urge a no vote on Proposition 105. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Don. That was great to hear from you. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Chris, and I am the moderator on tonight's telephone town hall. Right now, we are talking with Colorado voters about Proposition 105. If you just joined us, all you have to do to ask a question tonight is press 0. And this is what this is about. It's about having a conversation with you. So we want you to press 0. We want to hear from you. We want to talk with you. Our next speaker is Mary Lee Chin. Mary Lee Chin is a registered dietitian with over 40 years of experience, and she's going to talk to us a little about, surprisingly, food. Go ahead, Mary Lee.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening to everybody. As a registered dietitian, I've worked a lot with labels on foods, teaching consumers how when they shop at the grocery store to read labels so that they can get the food that they want. The hallmark of a good label is that it's accurate, consistent, and reliable. So a good example is a nutrition label, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It tells you calories and nutrients in it, and it helps consumers make choices at the grocery store. A bad example is Proposition 105, which wants to label genetically engineered ingredients in food. And so what it will say is if a food contains any ingredient that it has been genetically engineered, it must be labeled. But that label fails on those three hallmarks of a good label. It is not accurate, certainly not consistent, and not reliable because it exempts over 2/3 of the foods that are going to be sold in Colorado. So Proposition 105 does not deliver. It simply does not do what it claims to do. And there are other national labels in existence that can provide the information that it claims to do much better and much more cheaply for the consumer. So please, I urge you to take a hard look at Proposition 105 and realize it does not provide the consumer with the valuable information that we need to make food choices.
Thanks, Mary Lee. For those of you who just joined us, my name is Chris, and I'm the moderator for tonight's conversation with Colorado voters about Proposition 105. You can go to factsabout105.com to learn more. But what tonight is really about is having a conversation. So if you want to ask a question of Dawn or of Mary Lee or of Dana, what you need to do is press 0. It's just like being in a classroom and raising your hand. So press 0, and we'd love to take your questions. We'd love to hear from you. Tonight really is about having a interactive conversation. So press 0 if you want to ask us a question. Our next speaker is Dana Bieber. Dana is an advocate for coalition groups representing farmers, agricultural groups, physicians, scientists, and food producers in states across the country. And she is really an expert about what is and isn't in this bill and how the implementation would work and what would happen. So, Dana, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to talk with all of you. You know, Proposition 105, it fails on its fundamental promise to provide information to consumers. And it does so because it is so poorly written that it actually doesn't tell consumers which foods contain GMO ingredients and which foods do not. And you heard Mary Lee talk a little bit more about that earlier. That's why it provides misleading and inaccurate information to consumers. But what they won't get as good information, but that they will get as consumers, is be facing higher costs, both at the grocery store and in terms of taxpayer dollars. Proposition 105 is going to increase the cost of groceries by hundreds of dollars a year for the average family in Colorado. Those are expenses that get passed down to consumers, and they're unfair and unnecessary. At the same time, it's going to be costly on tax day because state agency will be responsible for writing hundreds of pages of regulations and enforcing Proposition 105, starting from everything from the Colorado family farmer to every grocery store. It's costly for taxpayers, costly for consumers, and it doesn't provide consumers with reliable information.
Thanks, Dana. You know, for those of you who are just joining us, again, my name is Chris. You just heard from Dana Bieber, who's an advocate. We've heard from Mary Lee Chin, who is a dietitian, and we've heard it from Dawn Shawcroft, who is a farmer. And we want to take your questions tonight. So all you have to do is press 0 on your phone to ask a question. And, we're actually going to direct our first question to Dana. This one comes from Linda in Colorado Springs. Linda, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead and ask your question, Linda.
Okay, my question is, how many foods in Colorado are actually genetically changed that we either have here in our state or send over to other states? And then my second part of that question is, if we're sending food, if we're getting genetically altered food, and I don't care what state we get it from, we need to know what's in our food. Is that what this Proposition 105 is all about?
That's a great question. Why don't we actually start with Mary Lee, who can talk a little about the food, and then we'll go to Dana, who can talk about the actual language. Mary Lee, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Well, when you say what foods are genetically engineered, the main crops in the United States are corn, cotton, soy, and particularly in Colorado, sugar beets. There are also some squash and papaya that are grown that are genetically engineered. And, of course, we don't have papaya in Colorado. And when you say we need to know what's in our food. The food that's produced through genetic engineering, the end product, whether it's a corn or a sugar or let's say oil from cottonseed or soy oil, is going to be nutritionally equivalent as the food that is regularly grown or what we call conventionally grown. So there is no nutritional difference. And according to the Food and Drug Administration, we don't label unless the food is different, that is, in nutrient content. And because genetically engineered foods are not nutritionally different, that is why they're not labeled. When we talk about 105 and the labeling it requires, though, it is very misleading because even though there is no difference, and for example, let's take an oil from corn that has been genetically engineered. By the time you process the corn and turn it into an oil, there are no more components, that is a protein, which is the way you measure genetically engineered products, left in the oil. Oil is a fat, so there's no more protein. But under 105, it needs to be labeled. So it just doesn't make sense to the consumer because here's a product that does not contain the genetically engineered component, but it must be labeled.
You know, Linda, you also mentioned that you do want to know about if some of your foods contain GMO ingredients or they don't. And Proposition 105 just simply isn't going to provide that information for you. But for you and other consumers who do want to know if there are GMO in your food, there's already 2 national labeling systems. Consumers can look for either the organic or the non-GMO verified label. Both are reliable and accurate, and they don't have all of the exemptions that are contained in Proposition 105.
Thanks, Dana and Marilee. That was a great first question. And you know what? For those of you who are just joining us, you are joining a live telephone town hall with Colorado voters about Measure 105, and we want to hear from you. If you have a question about Proposition 105 at any time, just go ahead and press 0 on your phone so we can get your question. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to factsabout105.com. But besides taking your questions, we also have questions for you. So I want to, ask you the first question of the night. What action would you be willing to take to help protect Colorado farmers? Press 1 on your phone now if you'll encourage your friends and family to vote no on Prop 105. Press 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Prop 105. Press 3 if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter about why we should vote no on Prop 105. Press 4 if you'll do all of the above. Again, that's 1, to encourage your friends and family to vote no on Prop 105. 2, if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Prop 105. 3, if you'll share information on Facebook or Twitter, or 4, if you'll do all of the above. And again, press 0 if you want to ask a question. We're going to go to Deborah in a moment here, but first I actually have a question that I want to ask Dana. Dana, what kind of information would consumers get from these labels?
Well, they would actually, unfortunately, get misleading and inaccurate information from these labels. And the reasons for that is because of the way it's so poorly written. Marilee talked a little bit about this. 2/3 of the food that is even sold in the state of Colorado gets exempt under Proposition 105. So already we have incomplete information. And then certain foods that don't even contain any GMO ingredients, yet they would have to be labeled under Proposition 105 that says that there are GMO ingredients. That's inaccurate to consumers. And at the same time, there are foods that were made or contain GMO ingredients, things like meat and dairy products that come from animals that were fed GE grains and injected with GE medications, but yet those get a special exemption. They're not labeled. There's other products like cheese and cheese products. Those contain GMOs in them, but you won't know it under Proposition 105 because cheese, like a lot of other products, gets a special exemption. That is completely misleading to consumers.
Thanks so much, Dana. Again, press 0 if you want to ask us a question. Our next question comes from Deborah in Pueblo. Deborah, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. Is this a mandatory thing that they're trying to get across, or is this voluntarily? And how would it affect the cost?
Deborah, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. Yes, this would be a mandatory regulation, but only on some of the food products that are sold in Colorado because other food products get a special exemption. And let's talk a little bit about the cost. That was the second part of your question. There's costs related to different groups, both the taxpayers and consumers. Consumers will really end up footing the bill for this in the aspect that higher grocery prices, because remember, this is a Colorado-only initiative. So it means that food only for the state of Colorado will have to be specially handled and distributed because it has to be segregated. Everywhere from the farm to the grocery store, there's got to be completely different lines of segregation. So that starts with farmers and food producers and grocers. Those costs are passed on to consumers. At the same time, there'll be food companies that don't want to put an inaccurate and misleading label on their product, of course. So to avoid that, they'll have to remake their food just for the state of Colorado with higher-priced ingredients. Those costs get passed on to consumers. And at the same time, there is going to be state agency that's going to be given a free hand to write hundreds of pages of regulations to monitor and enforce this all across the state, from every day from farmers to grocery stores. That's going to cost millions, and Colorado taxpayers have to pay for it. There's no funding source, nor is there a limit of taxpayer money that can be spent.
Thanks so much, Dana. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, we're hosting a live telephone town hall where we're talking about Measure 105, Proposition 105, and how it will affect people here in Colorado. If you want to ask a question at any point, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone, and that's your cue to basically just like raising your hand in a classroom and allowing us to talk. We're going to take a few more questions live from the audience, but again, for those of you who are just joining us, all you have to do is press 0 to ask a question, and we actually asked a question of all of you, so I'll just repeat it for anybody who joined us. What action are you willing to take to protect Colorado's farmers? Push 1 on your phone if you'll encourage friends and family to vote no on Prop 105. Push 2 if you'll write a letter to the editor about voting no on Prop 105. Push 3 to share information on Facebook or Twitter about why you'll vote no on Prop 105. And, next question right now is we're going to go to Jerry in Colorado Springs. Jerry, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Actually, I want to say something right now first. I'm 80 years old, and I can see the changes that have came to our country for a long time, and we have more regulations and more people, and actually a lot of these regulations, people cheat on them anyway. I think it's a shame that they're trying to put even more on us, and I just want to know, we are now, lots of us now going to the farmers that bring the farmers market to town, and I don't want anything to happen to them and their prices. I want them to have the freedom to sell us the good foods they bring. So what is this going to do to affect people like that?
That's a great question, Jaron. I think that's actually right up Don's alley. Don, do you want to go ahead and tackle that one?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that comment, Jerry. We certainly likewise appreciate those farmers who have access to directly bring their product to you in the form of those kinds of markets. Under this legislation, or this initiative at least, why technically they would be required to label that if they in fact cannot prove that it has not been raised with genetically engineered, nor in particular that it hasn't been commingled or mixed with genetically engineered ingredients or genetically engineered crops. So that's just part of that cost of the increased regulation. And not only those farmers, but all the farmers across the state would certainly be subject to those types of requirements to sign a sworn affidavit that their crop has not been at any point in time mixed or commingled with any genetic engineered crop, if in fact they are raising non-genetic engineered crop, or in fact just the converse. If they are producing a genetic engineered crop, they have to verify that that is in fact the case, keeping track of those things all along the production line. So I certainly appreciate your call, Jerry.
Thanks, Don, and thank you, Jerry. Next up, we are going to go to Corey from Starsburg. Corey had a question about how this would affect producers. Corey, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, Corey.
Yeah, we're large-acred farmers across eastern Colorado, and just wondering, is this going to put more restrictions on us of what we can apply to our ground, and how is it going to affect, because we're predominantly a grain market, so is it going to affect us in our grain marketing or anything of that sort?
Don, that sounds, again, like it's right up your alley.
Yes, thanks, Chris. Corey, I assume, are you from Strasburg? Is that correct? I couldn't hear you. Anyway, Corey,
correct.
Thank you, Corey. That is very much of a concern. Not only are we concerned about the immediate impact of whether you would be able to market effectively that product if you are raising genetically engineered corn or any other product that is genetically engineered, because of the restriction of just in Colorado and the fact that if we export anything out of Colorado, it would require to be labeled. But also we are very concerned about limiting the opportunity for future crops and crop advancements. For example, for other disease or pest resistance, even drought tolerance, or improved growth and enhanced nutrition products. So we are concerned indeed about whether this would be a limiting of our opportunities in the future, and specifically limiting your opportunity. We are very concerned about what this potential impact could be to markets, not only for corn, but especially for sugar beet producers, because of this initiative requiring sugar from a genetically engineered sugar beet to be required even though there's no protein, the genetically engineered component of that sugar beet plant, left in that sugar that is marketed in Colorado and in the country. Certainly I do appreciate that question, Corey. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Don. I appreciate that, and thank you, Corey, for the question. Again, if you want to ask a question, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone, just like raising your hand in a classroom. And if you want to learn more, you can go to factsabout105.com. Our next question comes from Danielle in Grand Junction. Danielle has a question about regulations, which I think is right up Dana's alley. Danielle, are you there?
Yes, yes, I am. I think there's just far too much regulation and control over everything. Food is something that farmers should be in control of. People who have agricultural knowledge, animal husbandry knowledge, should be at the top of any government agency, not some bureaucrat, not somebody who is appointed, but there's just too much control. It goes way past socialism in the future. It goes past anything but power over everything in our lives. Are we Americans, or are we, just some people who don't care anymore about who?
Danielle, you were talking about federal regulations and how people should be treated under regulations. I think one of the things that everybody can agree on is that every farmer, food producer, and consumer should be treated equally. And that's another place where Proposition 105 fails, because they're not treated fairly, because farmers in Colorado and food producers and consumers are put at a disadvantage compared to neighboring states and the rest of the country. Instead, our labeling standards need to come at a federal or a nationwide level, so everyone is treated equally. And that's what you find under the organic or the non-GMO verified label. Both of those reliably provide consumers with accurate information that their food doesn't contain GMOs, and it treats everybody equally.
Thanks, Dana. Again, if you want to ask us a question, press 0. Our next question comes from Bob out in Golden. He had a question about some of the TV ads he's been seeing. Bob, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go right ahead. Ask your question, sir.
Well, could you say a little more about why in the ad it talks about crops that are not genetically modified would still be labeled that way?
Sure. Mary Lee, maybe do you want to address a little of that?
Absolutely, Bob. Don talked a little bit about this too, and when you genetically engineer a product, you're moving a gene which is actually a protein. So when you have a genetically engineered beet, in the processing of the beet into sugar, you're removing the protein. You can no longer measure, and there is no longer a genetically engineered ingredient in there. So even though that sugar contains no genetically engineered component, under Proposition 105, it still needs to be labeled genetically engineered. So that simply doesn't make sense. It's very deceptive for the consumer. Same thing will happen in processing corn or canola into oil. The protein content, that is the genetically engineered component, is removed, and there is no genetically engineered component in the resulting oil. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Mary Lee. Next up, we are going to go to Margaret. Margaret is in in Como, it looks like. Margaret, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. My first question was answered just a minute ago about organic foods, that they have no GMOs. I do have a question about wheat. You didn't mention wheat as genetically modified, and I know we do grow a lot of wheat, and I know wheat is causing a lot of health problems. So does that have anything to do with the genetic engineering?
That is a great question. Mary Lee, do you want to take this one?
Yes. There is no genetically modified wheat on the market right now. There is some research being done, and excellent research being done on wheat to increase yield or to resist certain viruses and diseases. In terms of wheat causing diseases, I think you're talking about gluten, and we see so many gluten-free products on the market. And that's an example of good labeling. If you want to avoid gluten, you look for the label that says gluten-free. And the same thing, there are some people who want to avoid genetically engineered foods, so they should be able to look for a label that says GMO-free. But Proposition 105 does not do that. It labels some foods as genetically engineered that does not contain it, and then exempts other foods that do contain the genetically engineered component. And that's why 105 is not a good labeling bill, particularly for consumers who are trying to buy and make choices at the grocery market.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary Lee. Our next question comes from Rose in Lamar. She had some questions about cheese and milk being exempt and what's not exempt, what is going to be labeled, what isn't going to be labeled. Rose, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, Rose.
Well, you had said that dairy products and cheeses were exempt. So my question was, what products are they actually going after? Is it the wheat crops, the potato crops, the sugar beets, the soybean? What, is it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rose. I think Dana is the best person to answer that one. Dana, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi, Rose. Yeah, great question, because you're right. The very first thing that the proponents did when they wrote Proposition 105 is they started making all these indefensible exemptions. So, all meat and dairy products and all cheese and cheese products get these special exemptions. So what's left of being labeled, and wheat, again, is not a GE crop. And so none of those products are. You know what really ends up getting labeled, and it's actually mislabeled under Proposition 105, are the products that Mary Lee were talking about. Those are foods that may have just a little bit of sugar beet in them from Colorado, or have a bit of cornstarch or soybean oil. Even though there is no GMO protein, no GMO ingredient at all in that finished product, it would still have to be labeled saying that it does contain GMOs. That's completely inaccurate and misleading information to consumers. And that's one of the many reasons that our coalition has come together, and we know that Proposition 105 deserves a no vote.
Great. Thanks so much. Again, if you want to ask us a question, press 0. We want to go to our second poll question. Then we're going to go to James in Buena Vista for a question. But our second poll question is, what worries you most about Proposition 105? Push 1 if you're worried about the impact on local farmers. Push 2 if you're worried about the increase in grocery costs. Push 3 if you're worried about misleading labels. Push 4 if you'll say all of the above. Again, 1, worried about the impact on local farmers. 2, the increase in grocery costs. 3, the worry about misleading labels. 4, all of the above. And again, our next question comes from James in Buena Vista. He had a question for Don. James, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. My question is to Don, because what I see in this is the potential for all of our agricultural interest, ranchers, farmers, coming in if this were to pass, and I hope it doesn't pass. What are we putting in regulations? Because like they said, regulations are going to be created after the fact. These regulations can come back and hurt our agriculture and hurt our individuals if by some chance or mistake something wasn't listed. When the stuff goes out of state, somebody could come back in and use our state laws to be turned against our agricultural people.
Thanks for the question, James. That is very definitely a concern of ours. This initiative is just exactly that, an initiative. The rules and regulations that are yet to be written are going to be left up to regulators, of course, to create those rules. There are some specific things because of the fact that this is a labeling initiative. And so, as you stated, in fact, agricultural products exported out of Colorado would be required to be labeled as genetically engineered. That really concerns us, not only from that retribution, if you will, from someone who may detect that after it has left the state and say, hey, Colorado, you didn't do that right. Then Colorado, of course, would have to turn around and say, all right, who was the individual, the producer, the family farmer who actually signed that sworn statement that there was no genetically engineered component in this product, and in fact that it was not mixed or commingled with any genetically engineered product. That's a really heavy burden for that individual family farmer to bear. And so that, in fact, is, as you have stated, I am concerned and do not want to see this proposition passed, and that's why I'm encouraging, from a family farmer's perspective, to vote no on Proposition 105. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Don. And Mary Lee, I think you might want to add something on here.
Yes, I think an additional burden for the farmer is that Proposition 105 demands zero tolerance of genetically engineered components in the food. And so when it's measured, they are giving no leeway to the farmer. If the farmer, for instance, grows genetically engineered and conventional crops, it's very easy to get a little dust on the conventional crop, and then because we have zero tolerance, then that conventional crop has to be considered genetically engineered when it's not. And to show how extreme this is, Europe, which does have some labeling requirements, even allows a tolerance level of 0.9%. Japan, where the people are very sensitive to genetically engineered foods, allows 5%. Proposition 105 at 0.0% is too extreme and places an even greater burden on the farmer and the food processor.
Thanks, Mary Lee. Again, if you have a question you want to ask us tonight, all you have to do is press 0 on your phone. We want to hear from you. We're having a conversation about 105. If you want to learn more, you can go to Facts About 105. If you want to ask a question, you can press 0. Our next question comes from Rick in Burlington, and Rick has a question about how they're going to enforce this thing. Rick?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, sir.
Yes, sir. First of all, I'm totally against 105, but I see this as just another in for the state to grow another bureaucracy or set up another agency that we don't need, that won't do anything, that won't help us in any way, shape, or form. Is this 105 going to fertilize the ground for that, or do you know?
That's a great question.
Rick.
Dana, do you want to?
Yeah, Rick, make no mistake. Colorado taxpayers have got to pay for this. And, if you think about it, there's going to be a new bureaucracy that's created under Proposition 105, and that bureaucracy is responsible for testing and enforcing measures everywhere from the farm to the transportation system to the food processor and to the grocery store. Every single one of those lines across the food supply chain will have to be enforced under Proposition 105. There is no funding mechanism for it provided in Proposition 105, nor is there a limit of taxpayer money that can be spent. I mean, it's going to run easily into the tens of millions of dollars every year to properly enforce this, and it's going to be done by a government bureaucracy. It's going to really put Colorado farmers and food producers at an enormous competitive disadvantage, and it's costly to Colorado taxpayers.
Thanks, Dana. Our next question comes from Cynthia in Glenwood Springs. Cynthia, you had a question about the reason for this whole initiative.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead and ask your question, ma'am.
What is the reason for this proposition? I see no reason for it.
Well, Cynthia, that's a good question, because if you think about it, there are consumers who prefer foods for whatever reason without GMO ingredients in them. For those consumers, there's already 2 nationwide labeling systems that are available, both the organic and the non-GMO verified label. So there really isn't any reason for consumers to have Proposition 105 because we already have the other labeling standards. And, this has been a recycled measure that has been before Oregon voters years ago. They rejected it. California voters rejected it 2 years ago, and Washington voters rejected it last year. It's a recycled initiative that fails on its fundamental promise to provide information to consumers, and instead it provides inaccurate and misleading information when we already have 2 nationwide labeling standards.
Thanks, Dana. Our next question comes from Joyce in Kansas City. Joyce, go ahead and ask your question.
I have a double question. Who wrote, promoted, and profits from 105? And my second is, from the time that we humans have been cultivating food, we've always engineered it to be better food. What's different?
Joyce, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that. I'll answer the first part of your question, and I bet Dawn can answer the second part of it. Who wrote and promoted, like I just mentioned, this is a recycled initiative. It's been before many other state voters, and it's been rejected every time for the same fundamental reasons. It's because it's so flawed. It's so poorly written. When you exempt 2/3 of the food that's even sold in the state already, you have inaccurate and incomplete information. And then when you require the label on foods that actually don't even contain GMO ingredients in them, that's misleading. But I think perhaps the most alarming are, under Proposition 105, there are thousands of food products that actually contain or are made with GMO ingredients. Anything such as cheese and cheese products or any meat and dairy products. They won't get labeled only because they got a special exemption. That makes no sense.
That certainly is accurate, Dana. Joyce, thank you for that question. And your point is very well taken about cultivating our food, cultivating crops. Family farmers, as you mentioned, for centuries have been altering the crops that they produce so that we have better food, definitely more nutritious food. And most of all for a family farmer is that we've been able to reduce the costs of producing that food, of growing those crops on our farms. That really is what makes a big difference to us. Even a more important note, I think, Joyce, is the fact that now with genetically engineered, we can be so much more precise about what these foods do. In spite of those wonderful benefits, this proposition would not help us and, in fact, would limit our opportunities for future crop advances, as I mentioned, for disease and pest resistance. So certainly, I agree with you 100%, and I hope that you'll join me in voting no on Proposition 105. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Don. Our next question comes from Dean in Fort Collins. I think this is a great one for Dana. He has some questions about if other states have implemented this, what have the results been. Dean, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, sir.
Yeah, I want to know if any other states have implemented this law, and if so, what are I've already heard the cons. Are there any pros for it?
Dean, this is Dana. There really aren't. Here's what's happened. There's only been one other state, and that's the state of Vermont, which, of course, is not a very big farming state. They are the only other state that has passed this and has it going into effect. But it's important to note that Proposition 105, it actually conflicts with the Vermont law. So already we only have one state that has this on the books, and now Colorado's looking at it, and we already have a conflict. So food products that are sold in Colorado are not the same food products that can be sold in Vermont. Like I said, this was rejected a few years back by Oregon voters. It was rejected 2 years ago by California voters. It was rejected last year by Washington voters. It's a recycled initiative that has just now found its way to Colorado, and it's still the same flawed proposal, and that's why it deserves a no vote.
Thanks, Dana. Our next question comes from Tammy in Whitewater. Tammy had some questions about what happens if this passes. Tammy, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask your question, Tammy.
I have a question and I guess a concern at the same time, and that would be that we already see farming diminishing due to many different reasons. And another thing, if this passes, if 105 passes, and the cost of being a farmer, and of course all the people down the chain all the way to the consumer, it has to increase the cost to cover what has to be done. Will that not make the Colorado farmers unable to compete with the other states who do not have this increased cost caused by 105?
That's a great question, Tammy.
And will
Don,
we not see more and more farmers leave the industry?
That's a great question, Tammy. Don, do you want to go ahead and address that?
Certainly, thank you. Thank you for that question, Tammy. That really is a great concern of ours for Colorado farmers to be placed at this competitive disadvantage compared to those who are in all of our neighboring states, but also across the entire country. If we're not able to take advantage of the advantages of less fuel, less fertilizer, less water, in fact, to raise our crops. And so that is of great concern to us that we would be subject to this competitive disadvantage. So, again, thank you for that question. I hope, in fact, also, Tammy, that you will not only agree with us, but also take advantage of the opportunity to share with your friends and family about the need to vote no on Proposition 105.
Thanks, Don. Dana, do you want to add something onto that?
You know, you also mentioned the competitive disadvantage, and boy, are you right about that, because Proposition 105 is so poorly written that actually all crops and food products that are exported to other states would still have to have a label on it. So you think about it, you've got this Colorado-based product that is sold in neighboring states and they're trying to compete, but yet they have to have a label on it, even if it's sitting on a grocery store in Arizona. And the Arizona products and products from every other state in the entire country don't have to have that label on it. That's definitely going to put our farmers and food producers at a competitive disadvantage. That's why
you're
definitely no vote.
You're definitely right, Dana. Again, we want to ask you one last poll question. It's one we asked before, but if you haven't responded yet, please do. What action are you willing to take to help protect Colorado farmers? Push 1 if you'll encourage friends and family to vote no on Proposition 105. Push 2 if you're willing to write a letter to the editor about voting no on Prop 105. Push 3 if you're willing to share information on Facebook or Twitter. Press 4 if you're willing to do all of the above. And we're going to take our last question now from Linda. Linda has a question about how this affects imported foods. Linda, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead, Linda.
My question was, what will the imported foods from other states have on this?
That's a great question. Dana, do you want to talk about that?
Our grocery stores are filled with imported foods.
That's exactly right, Linda. Imported foods would also have to have a label on them as well if they don't get one of the special exemptions or loopholes under Proposition 105. But you know where the real problem comes in? It goes back to that enforcement mechanism. You know, we have a state bureaucracy that is going to be on Colorado farms and in Colorado food producers' plants and in Colorado grocery stores. But other products that just come in from other states, they simply have to have a statement signed that says, yeah, it doesn't have any GMO ingredients in them. It's not as if state regulators are going to go to other states and really inspect that the way they're going to put Colorado farmers and food producers under the microscope. And that's what's not fair to Colorado farmers and food producers, and it's why they've joined the coalition to urge a no vote on Proposition 105.
Thanks, Dana. We're going to wrap things up quickly here, but Mary Lee, do you want to end with a quick closing thought or two?
Surely. Proposition 105 does not benefit the consumer at all. It offers no nutritional advantage, which, of course, as a dietitian, I'm concerned about. But more critically, it does not provide reliable or accurate information. It does not identify which foods do contain genetically modified ingredients and which do not, or in many cases just mislabels them. So it also adds a burden to the consumer. And with food costs needing to be contained, this is an unnecessary proposition, and I hope you will take a good look at it and vote no on it.
Thanks, Mary Lee. And Don, do you want to say a quick closing thought?
Thank you, Chris. I would like, particularly those who are on the phone and have joined this town hall, we certainly appreciate your time and would hope that you would very carefully look at this and consider what it would do to family farmers in the state of Colorado. It would, in fact, unfairly hurt our state's farmers, cost Colorado taxpayers millions, and increase grocery costs to Colorado families by hundreds of dollars per year. I think it really is particularly an unfair burden to family farmers. Not only would it cause them costs for raising crops, growing crops, but also they buy food too, and those costs would be increased. Thank you.
Thanks. And Dana?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight and spending about 45 minutes talking about this poorly written Proposition 105. As Mary Lee just said, it fails on its fundamental promise to provide consumers with accurate information about which foods contain GMO ingredients and which don't. And at the same time, it hurts Colorado family farmers and food producers. But, it really hits hard to consumers as well. This will increase the cost of groceries for all families in Colorado and will increase the regulatory costs which have to be paid by Colorado taxpayers. Proposition 105 is all costs and no benefits, and it's why it deserves a no vote.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. You can go to factsabout105.com or known105.com if you'd like to leave a question or a comment or get more information. We're also going to put everyone into a voicemail now. So if you have a question that you didn't get to ask or a thought you want to share with us, please leave us a voicemail. And thank you for your time this evening. We hope you all have a wonderful night.